At Christmas dinner, my millionaire daughter asked me, "Dad, did you like the apartment I gave you?" I froze and replied, "What apartment? I'm choosing between paying the rent and my medicine." That's when my son-in-law walked up to her. The greedy man was exposed, and I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked through Bella's front door that Christmas evening. The house was magnificent as always, marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, fresh gardenias filling expensive vases, everything perfect and pristine. But there was something in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. At 62, I'd learned to read people's faces, and my daughter's expression wasn't sitting right with me. Bella greeted me with her usual hug, but it felt rehearsed, like she was going through the motions. Eugene, my son-in-law, barely looked up from his phone when I entered their living room. "Dad, you look thin," Bella said, studying my face with concern. "Are you eating enough?" I forced a smile. The truth was, I'd been choosing between groceries and my blood pressure medication for the past 3 months. My Social Security barely covered rent, and the part-time job at the hardware store had ended when they downsized in November. But I wasn't about to burden Bella with my problems, especially not on Christmas. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting older," I said, settling into the plush armchair that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. The dinner was elaborate. Prime rib, lobster tail, wine that Eugene made a show of explaining was imported from his personal collection. I picked at my food, my stomach tight with the familiar anxiety of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. "So, Dad," Bella said as we finished the main course, her voice taking on that casual tone that usually preceded important conversations, "how are you liking the apartment I got you?" I stopped chewing. The piece of meat in my mouth suddenly felt like cardboard. "What apartment?" Bella laughed, but it sounded forced. "The apartment, Dad, the one downtown. I've been paying for it for months now. You haven't mentioned it once." My heart started pounding. I set down my fork, my hands beginning to tremble slightly. "Bella, honey, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm still in the same cramped place on 5th Street. The landlord's been threatening eviction because I'm 3 months behind on rent." The color drained from Bella's face. Eugene, who had been scrolling through his phone, suddenly looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to something that looked almost like panic. "That's impossible," Bella said slowly. "I've been sending money every month. Eugene handles the transfers. He said you were all settled in, that you loved the new place." I felt like the room was spinning. "I haven't received any money, Bella. Last month I had to choose between paying for my heart medication and paying rent. I chose the medication and figured I'd deal with homelessness when it came." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, marking each second of this horrible revelation. Bella's eyes filled with tears, but there was something else there too, a growing anger that I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "Eugene," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "What is he talking about?" Eugene cleared his throat, his usual confident demeanor cracking. "There must be some misunderstanding. Stephen, are you sure you're remembering correctly? Sometimes at your age—" "Don't you dare!" I interrupted, my own anger flaring. "There's nothing wrong with my memory. I know exactly what bills I can and can't pay. I know exactly how many nights I've laid awake wondering if I'd end up on the streets." Bella turned to face Eugene fully, and for the first time in years, I saw the strong-willed woman I'd raised before she married him. "Eugene, I want to see the bank records. Now." "Bella, this is ridiculous. Your father is obviously confused. Show me the records, Eugene." Her voice could have cut glass. Eugene stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I think Stephen is having some kind of episode. Maybe we should call his doctor." That's when I knew. The way he avoided eye contact, the way his hands shook as he reached for his wine glass, the way he was trying to make this about my mental state instead of answering a simple question. I'd seen enough liars in my 62 years to recognize the signs. "Eugene," I said quietly, standing up slowly. My knees protested, but I needed to be at eye level with him. "Where's the money my daughter sent for my apartment?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. There were complications with the transfers, banking issues. I was handling it." "Liar," Bella whispered, but the word carried the force of a shout. The expensive Christmas dinner sat forgotten on the table as 3 generations of my family faced off in that beautifully decorated dining room. The twinkling lights on the Christmas tree seemed to mock the darkness that had just descended over our holiday. I looked at my daughter, successful, intelligent, generous, and realized she'd been trying to take care of me for months while I suffered in silence. And the man she'd trusted with her money, the man she'd married and built a life with, had been stealing from both of us. Eugene's face had gone pale and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the house. He kept glancing toward the door like he was calculating whether he could make a run for it. But there would be no running from this. Not anymore. As I stood there, watching my son-in-law's world crumble around him, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not because of the money, though God knows I needed it, but because my daughter's eyes were finally open. The question now was, what else had Eugene been hiding? The next hour felt like the longest of my life. Bella had disappeared into Eugene's home office while he sat in the living room, fidgeting with his wedding ring and avoiding my gaze. I remained in my chair, my mind racing as pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began falling into place. "Eugene," I said finally, breaking the suffocating silence. "How long has this been going on?" He looked up, his face a mask of false confusion. "Stephen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. There's been a banking error, that's all. These things happen. Banking errors don't last for months." My voice was steady, but inside I felt like I was on fire. "And they don't involve apartments that don't exist." Eugene stood up and began pacing, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, I know this seems bad, but you have to understand." "No," I cut him off. "You understand something. For the past 6 months I've been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries. I've been wearing the same 3 shirts to work because I couldn't buy new ones. I've been lying awake at night wondering if I should just stop taking my medication and let nature take its course." His pacing stopped. "Stephen, I'm not finished." The anger was building now, a slow burn that had been smoldering for months without me even knowing it. While I was deciding whether to pay rent or buy my heart pills, you were sitting in this mansion, drinking expensive wine, telling my daughter that I was comfortable and happy in some apartment that doesn't exist. Eugene's face flushed red. "You don't understand the complexities of financial management. I was protecting Bella's interests. By stealing from her father? I wasn't stealing." The words burst out of him like he'd been holding them back. "I was managing resources efficiently." That's when Bella returned carrying a stack of papers and her laptop. Her face was white as snow, and her hands were shaking. She looked at Eugene like she'd never seen him before. "8 months, she said quietly. "I've been sending you $3,000 every month for 8 months to pay for Dad's apartment and living expenses." Eugene's face went from red to pale in seconds. "Bella, let me explain. $24,000, she continued, her voice getting stronger. "Plus the initial deposit for the apartment that doesn't exist. $28,000 total." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. $28,000. That money could have changed my entire life. I could have moved to a decent place, bought proper food, kept up with my medical care, maybe even had a little dignity left. "Where is it, Eugene?" Bella's voice was ice cold. Eugene's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally, he sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I invested it." "You invested my father's living expenses?" Bella's voice was climbing higher. "The market was good, and I thought I could double it, maybe triple it, give him an even better life. But there were some losses, and then I needed to recoup. So I borrowed against the house to cover the previous losses." "You borrowed against our house?" Bella looked like she might be sick. Eugene nodded miserably. "It was supposed to be temporary. I had a sure thing coming up, a business deal that would have paid for everything and more." I stood up slowly, my whole body aching with more than just physical pain. "So while I was choosing between food and medicine, you were gambling with my daughter's money?" "It wasn't gambling. It was calculated investment." "Shut up," Bella said, and the finality in her voice made Eugene's mouth snap closed. "Just shut up." She walked over to me, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought I was taking care of you. I thought you were okay." I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake with sobs. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. You tried to do right by me, but I should have checked on you more. I should have visited. I should have—" "No," I said firmly. "You trusted your husband to do what you asked him to do. You shouldn't have had to babysit a grown man to make sure he wasn't stealing from your family." Eugene flinched at the word stealing, but he didn't argue. He just sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. How much is left? Bella asked, turning back to him. Eugene's silence was answer enough. How much, Eugene? About 3,000, he whispered. Out of 28,000? Bella's voice cracked. The investments went bad and then I tried to fix it, but you lost my father's money. She said it like she was trying to make the words real by speaking them out loud. You lost $25,000 of my father's money. I sank back into my chair, the full weight of what had happened hitting me. Not just the money, though, God knows that hurt, but the months of suffering that didn't have to happen. The nights I'd lain awake worried about ending up homeless, the meals I'd skipped, the medications I'd stretched by taking them every other day instead of daily. All of that suffering while Eugene gambled away my lifeline. There's more, Bella said quietly, still looking at her laptop screen. The credit card bills. Eugene, you've been using our joint account to cover personal expenses that I never authorized. Eugene looked up sharply. Those were business expenses. $500 at a steakhouse last month while my father was eating peanut butter sandwiches. A $1,000 suit while he was deciding between rent and medication. The room fell silent again except for the grandfather clock and Bella's quiet crying. I looked at Eugene, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time. The expensive clothes, the perfect hair, the manicured nails, all of it paid for with money that should have been ensuring his father-in-law didn't die of poverty or neglect. I need you to leave, Bella said suddenly. Eugene's head shot up. What? I need you to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. Bella, please, we can work this out. Leave, she repeated. Go stay at your brother's, go to a hotel, I don't care, but I can't look at you right now. Eugene stood up, looking panicked. You're upset, I understand, but I'm not upset, Eugene, I'm done. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eugene looked from Bella to me and back to Bella, clearly searching for any sign that she might change her mind. He found none. As he walked toward the stairs to pack, I heard him muttering under his breath about overreactions and temporary setbacks. Even now, even caught red-handed, he couldn't admit what he'd really done. But I knew exactly what he'd done. He'd stolen my dignity, my security, and my daughter's trust. The question now was, what else would we discover once we started digging deeper? After Eugene left that night, Bella and I sat in her kitchen until nearly 3 a.m, going through bank statements and credit card bills spread across her granite countertop. Each document revealed another layer of betrayal, another month of money that should have been helping me survive instead funding Eugene's lifestyle. Dad, look at this, Bella said, pointing to a charge from October. $2,000 at some investment seminar in Vegas. The same week you called me about the heating bill, remember? I remembered that call. I'd been sitting in my cold apartment, wearing 2 sweaters because I couldn't afford to turn the heat on. I'd been too embarrassed to ask her directly for help, so I'd mentioned casually that the utility company was threatening shutoff. Bella had told me not to worry, that Eugene would take care of everything. He had taken care of it, all right. He'd taken care of it by pocketing the money and letting me freeze. There's more, she continued, her voice getting smaller with each discovery. Look at February. 3 charges at high-end restaurants totaling $800. That was the month you ended up in the emergency room because you couldn't afford your blood pressure medication. My chest tightened remembering that night. I'd collapsed at the hardware store, and Mrs. Peterson from next door had driven me to the hospital. The doctor had lectured me about taking my medication regularly, not knowing I'd been rationing pills because I couldn't afford a refill. Bella, honey, you don't need to torture yourself with this, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Yes, I do. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. I need to see all of it, every lie, every stolen dollar. I need to understand how blind I was. We kept digging. By dawn, we'd uncovered a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. Every month, Bella had transferred money for my care. Every month, Eugene had diverted it for his own purposes. Gambling, expensive dinners, clothes, gadgets. While I was cutting pills in half and eating instant noodles, he was living like a king on money meant to keep me from becoming homeless. The apartment, Bella said suddenly, looking up from a bank statement. He told me he'd found you a beautiful place downtown, said you were so excited about the modern appliances and the view. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. I've never even been downtown except to apply for jobs. The only view from my place is the parking lot behind the laundromat. Bella's face crumpled. He described it in such detail. Said you loved the big kitchen, that you were cooking again for the first time since Mom died. That hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't cooked a real meal in months because I couldn't afford ingredients for anything beyond basic survival food. Sarah, my late wife, would have been heartbroken to see me living on peanut butter and crackers. He even said you were making friends with the other residents, Bella continued, tears flowing freely now. Said there was a community garden where you were growing tomatoes. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Eugene hadn't just stolen money, he'd stolen my daughter's peace of mind, her belief that her father was okay. He'd fed her beautiful lies while I suffered in isolation. Bella, I said gently, this isn't your fault. Isn't it? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I should have visited more. I should have checked on you myself instead of trusting him to handle everything. You were busy building your career, living your life. That's what you're supposed to do. But you needed me, and I wasn't there. I stood up and walked around the table to put my arms around her. You were there. You sent money every month to take care of me. You called regularly. The only reason I suffered is because the man you trusted betrayed both of us. She leaned into my embrace, and for a moment she felt like the little girl who used to come to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. I'd always been able to fix those problems with a bandage and a hug. This one was going to take more work. Dad, I want to understand something, she said, pulling back to look at me. Why didn't you tell me you weren't getting the money? When you called about the heating bill, or when you couldn't afford your medication, why didn't you say something? I sat back down heavily. This was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer revealed my own stubborn pride. Because I didn't want to be a burden. You'd just gotten that promotion at work. You and Eugene seemed so happy. I thought maybe the money was delayed, or there was some paperwork issue. And honestly, I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Of being 62 years old and not being able to take care of myself. Of needing my daughter's help to pay for basic necessities. Your mother and I, we always took care of ourselves. We never wanted to depend on our children. Bella's eyes filled with fresh tears. Dad, you're not a burden. You're my father. Taking care of you isn't an obligation, it's a privilege. I know that now. But pride makes you do stupid things sometimes. We sat in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Bella spoke up. I've been thinking about the timing of all this, she said. Eugene started handling your finances right after I got my promotion and the raise that came with it. Before that, I was sending you smaller amounts directly to your account. You think he saw an opportunity? I think he saw dollar signs. Her voice was bitter. I mentioned to him that I wanted to do more for you, maybe help you get a nicer place. The next week, he comes to me with this whole plan about finding you an apartment, managing your expenses, making sure you had everything you needed. The pieces were clicking into place. Eugene hadn't just seen an opportunity, he'd engineered it. He'd positioned himself as the solution to Bella's desire to help me, knowing it would give him access to a steady stream of money. He played us both, I said quietly, like a violin. Bella's jaw tightened. And the worst part is, he probably thought he deserved it. I heard him on the phone with his brother last week, complaining about how expensive it was to maintain his lifestyle on his salary alone. His lifestyle that includes this house, the BMW, and clothes that cost more than I used to make in a month. All of it built on lies. Bella stood up and began pacing. Dad, I need you to know something. I'm going to fix this. All of it. Bella, no, listen to me. I'm going to get every penny back that he stole from you. I'm going to make sure you have the apartment you should have had months ago. And I'm going to make sure Eugene faces consequences for what he did. There was something in her voice that reminded me of her mother. Sarah had that same tone when she'd made up her mind about something. Determined, unshakable, slightly dangerous to anyone who stood in her way. What are you planning? I asked. Bella smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. I'm planning to show Eugene that stealing from my family was the biggest mistake he ever made. As I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Bella wasn't just angry, she was calculating, and Eugene had no idea what was coming for him. The scared, guilty woman who'd been crying over bank statements was gone. In her place stood someone I barely recognized, a woman with the resources, intelligence, and motivation to make her husband pay for every dollar he'd stolen and every day he'd let me suffer. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something approaching satisfaction. Eugene thought he was smart, thought he could manipulate and steal without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The next few days felt like living in a detective movie, except the crimes were real and the victim was me. Bella had taken a week off work, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie, and we spent every waking hour unraveling the full extent of Eugene's deception. What we discovered made the stolen apartment money look like pocket change. "Dad, you need to see this," Bella called from Eugene's home office, where she'd been going through files for the past 2 hours. "Bring that box of papers from Mom's estate." I carried the box upstairs, my arthritic hands struggling with the weight. Inside were documents I'd given to Eugene years ago, when Bella asked him to help me organize my affairs after Sarah died. Property deeds, insurance policies, investment accounts, everything I'd accumulated over 40 years of marriage and steady work. Bella was sitting at Eugene's desk, surrounded by papers, her laptop open to what looked like financial records. Her face was white as paper. "What did you find?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The lake house," she said quietly. "Remember the lake house in Tahoe that you and Mom bought back in 1995? Of course I remembered. Sarah and I had saved for years to buy that little cabin. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, but it sat on a beautiful piece of land overlooking the lake. We'd planned to retire there, maybe pass it down to Bella and her children someday." "What about it?" Bella turned her laptop screen toward me. "Eugene sold it 6 months ago." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." "Look at this." She showed me a document on the screen. "Sale agreement for the property. And there's your signature." I stared at the signature line. It did look like my handwriting, but something felt wrong about it. "I never signed this, Bella." "I swear to you, I know you didn't." Her voice was deadly calm. "Because look at the date. You were in the hospital with pneumonia that week, remember? I have the discharge papers right here." My legs felt weak. I sank into the chair beside the desk, trying to process what she was telling me. "He forged my signature?" "That's not all." Bella pulled out another file. "The mutual fund account that Dad set up in the 80s, the one with about $40,000, cleaned out. Same forged signature, same impossible date." I felt like I was going to be sick. That mutual fund was supposed to be my emergency money, my safety net. Sarah and I had contributed to it faithfully for decades, never touching it except for true emergencies. "How much?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Bella's fingers flew over the calculator on her phone. The lake house sold for $320,000. The mutual fund was worth $42,000 when he liquidated it. The antique furniture from the house that I thought you'd donated, turns out he sold that too, for about $15,000. "Nearly $400,000, I whispered. "Plus the $28,000 he stole for your apartment expenses. We're looking at over $400,000 total." I couldn't breathe. That money represented my entire life's work, everything Sarah and I had built together. It was supposed to be my security, my dignity in old age. Instead, it had been feeding Eugene's gambling addiction and expensive tastes while I chose between rent and medication. "How is this legal?" I asked. "Don't you need a notary for property sales?" Bella's smile was bitter. "Remember Eugene's friend Mike, the one who's a notary? Turns out Mike has a gambling problem too. Eugene's been helping him out with loans." The picture was becoming clearer and uglier by the minute. Eugene hadn't just stolen from me. He'd built a network of corruption to facilitate it. "There's more," Bella continued, pulling out a thick folder. "The life insurance policy you signed over to me? Eugene convinced you to change the beneficiary, remember? You thought you were making me the beneficiary, but look at the paperwork." She showed me the forms. My signature again, but the beneficiary line read, Bella Eugene Hartwell Morrison, Bella's full married name, which meant Eugene would have legal claim to half the money as her spouse. "He was planning for me to die," I said quietly. "It looks that way." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn and expensive cars in the driveway. Everything I was seeing had been bought with my money, my life's work, my future security. "Bella," I said, turning back to face her, "I need you to tell me the truth. How bad is my financial situation now?" She took a deep breath. "Without the properties and investments Eugene liquidated, you're essentially destitute. Your Social Security covers basic rent and utilities, but nothing else. No savings, no assets, no backup plan. So if you hadn't been sending money for the apartment, you would have been homeless within months." The full scope of Eugene's cruelty hit me then. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd systematically dismantled every financial safeguard I had, leaving me completely dependent on Bella's generosity. And then he'd stolen that too. Where did the money go? I asked. Bella pulled up another screen on her laptop. Best I can tell, about half went to cover his gambling debts. The rest went into what he calls investments, but they look more like get-rich-quick schemes that all failed. There are payments to something called Golden Sunrise Opportunities and Pacific Dynasty Holdings, both companies that don't seem to actually exist. Pyramid schemes, or just straight-up fraud. Either way, the money's gone. I felt a rage building in my chest that I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Not just anger, a cold, calculating fury that demanded justice. What can we do legally? I asked. I've already called a lawyer. Elder financial abuse is a serious crime, especially when it involves forged documents and identity theft. The fact that he used his position as your daughter's husband to gain access to your financial information makes it even worse. Will we get the money back? Bella hesitated. Some of it, maybe. The house sale might be reversible since the signature was forged. The mutual fund is harder. Once money goes into failed investments, it's usually gone. But Eugene will face criminal charges, and we might be able to get a judgment against him for restitution. What about you? The divorce? The house you're living in? I don't care about any of that. Bella's voice was fierce. Let him have the house, the cars, whatever. I want him in prison, and I want him to pay back every penny he stole from you. I walked back to the desk and sat down, looking at all the evidence of Eugene's systematic theft spread out before us. Documents, bank statements, forged signatures, a paper trail of betrayal that went back years. How long do you think this has been going on? I asked. Probably since right after your cancer diagnosis 3 years ago, Bella said. That's when you started giving him access to your accounts, right? When I asked him to help you manage your affairs while you were going through treatment? I nodded. Sarah had just died. I was dealing with chemo, and Bella was overwhelmed trying to help me while managing her own career. Eugene had seemed like a godsend, offering to handle the paperwork and financial details that felt impossible at the time. He saw a vulnerable old man and decided I was an easy target, I said, and he was wrong. Bella's voice was steel. Because you're not alone, and I'm not the same naive woman who trusted him blindly. She began gathering the documents into neat piles, her movements precise and purposeful. Tomorrow we meet with the lawyer. Next week we file criminal charges. And Eugene learns that stealing from my family was the biggest mistake of his miserable life. As I watched my daughter prepare for battle, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for getting some money back, but for something more important. Eugene had tried to isolate me, to make me dependent and powerless, but he'd underestimated the bond between a father and daughter. He'd underestimated Bella's intelligence and resources. Most importantly, he'd underestimated what happens when you back a family into a corner. He was about to learn that some mistakes can't be fixed with charm and excuses. Some mistakes destroy everything you've worked to build. 2 weeks after our discovery, Eugene made his first mistake since getting caught. He came back to the house. Bella and I were in the kitchen going over paperwork from her lawyer when we heard his key in the front door. He walked in like he still belonged there, carrying a suitcase and wearing one of his expensive suits. The same suit, I realized with bitter irony, that my mutual fund money had probably bought. Bella, sweetheart, he called out, his voice carrying that false confidence I'd learned to recognize. I think we've let emotions get the better of us. It's time we talk like adults. Bella looked at me across the kitchen table, her eyes narrow. Stay calm, she whispered. Let him talk. Eugene appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I was shocked by how haggard he looked. His usually perfect hair was unkempt, his eyes were bloodshot, and he'd clearly lost weight. Good, I thought savagely. Let him suffer a little. Stephen, he said, nodding at me like we were old friends meeting for coffee. I'm glad you're here. This concerns you too. I bet it does, I replied evenly. He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited, spreading his hands on the table in what I suppose was meant to be a gesture of openness. Look, I know how this looks, but you're both missing the bigger picture here. Enlighten us, Bella said, her voice dangerously calm. Everything I did for this family. Stephen, you were struggling and Bella was stressed about your situation. I saw an opportunity to help both of you while building something bigger for our future. I almost laughed. By stealing my life savings? I wasn't stealing. I was investing. There's a difference. Eugene's voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child. The lake house was just sitting there, generating no income. The mutual fund was earning, what, 3% annually? I could have tripled that money in the right investments. But you didn't, Bella pointed out. You lost it all. Eugene waved a dismissive hand. Temporary setbacks. The market is unpredictable, but stop. Bella's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Just stop lying. She reached into the folder beside her and pulled out a stack of papers. These are bank records from your personal account, Eugene. The ones you thought I didn't have access to. Eugene's face went pale. Bella, you had no right. I had every right. We're still married, and this is still my house. She spread the papers across the table. $50,000 in casino withdrawals over the past year, $25,000 in online poker losses, $15,000 at the racetrack. Those were business expenses. Business expenses? Bella's voice climbed higher. What business involves losing my father's lake house money at a blackjack table? Eugene's composure was cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the house. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. My business deals fell through and I needed capital to... Your business deals. I leaned forward, fixing him with a stare that made him shrink back. Tell me about Pacific Dynasty Holdings, Eugene. The company that got $40,000 of my mutual fund money. That was a legitimate investment opportunity. Pacific Dynasty Holdings doesn't exist, Bella said flatly. I had my lawyer check. It's a shell company that you created to hide your gambling losses. Eugene's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw him for what he really was, a desperate, pathetic man who'd gambled away his family's future and gotten caught. Then the mask snapped back into place, and his expression hardened. Fine. You want the truth? Here's the truth. Stephen is a bitter old man who's jealous of what I've built with Bella. He's trying to turn you against me because he can't stand that you chose me over him. The accusation was so absurd that I actually did laugh. Eugene, I'm not competing with you for my daughter's affection. I'm her father. Are you? Because from where I sit, you've been nothing but a burden. A drain on our resources, a constant source of stress and guilt for Bella. I felt Bella stiffen beside me, but I held up a hand to stop her from responding. Keep talking, Eugene. Tell us how you really feel. I saved this family from your neediness, he continued, his voice getting louder and more agitated. Every month, Bella would stress about whether you were okay, whether you had enough money, whether you were taking care of yourself. I took that burden off her shoulders by stealing the money she sent to help me, by managing it efficiently. Do you think Bella needs the stress of wondering if her father can pay his bills? I was protecting her from your failure to plan for your old age. The cruelty of it took my breath away. In Eugene's mind, he was the hero of this story. He'd convinced himself that stealing from me was actually helping Bella. And the lake house? I asked. How was selling my property without my knowledge helping anyone? That dump was worthless to you. You never visited it after Sarah died. I turned it into liquid capital that could actually benefit the family. Liquid capital that you immediately lost gambling. Eugene's face flushed red. Those were calculated risks that didn't pay off. It happens in business. This wasn't business, Eugene. Bella's voice was so quiet I could barely hear her. This was theft. You forged my father's signature on legal documents. You stole his life savings. You left him choosing between food and medication while you lived like a king on his money. I was building our future. You were feeding your addiction. Bella stood up slowly, her hands flat on the table. And now you're going to pay for it. Eugene looked from Bella to me and back again, and I saw the exact moment when he realized his charm wasn't going to work this time. His expression shifted from fake confidence to something uglier. You'll regret this, he said to Bella. Both of you will. I know things about this family, about your precious father, that would change how you see him forever. Like what? Bella challenged. Eugene smiled, but it was a nasty expression. Ask him about the real reason he couldn't afford his bills, Bella. Ask him about the gambling problem that runs in his family. I felt like he'd punched me in the stomach. What are you talking about? The poker games at Murphy's Bar every Friday night, the sports betting with Tony Marconi. The reason you're really broke isn't because of medical bills. It's because you're just like me. Bella looked at me with confusion and growing alarm. Dad? I struggled to find words. Yes, I played poker on Friday nights. Yes, I occasionally bet on football games, but nothing like what Eugene was suggesting. Eugene, you know that's not. $50 a week, Eugene continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a killing blow. Sometimes more. Your father's been gambling away his social security while crying poverty to you. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the doubt creeping into Bella's eyes, the questions forming. Bella, I said quietly, it's not what he's making it sound like, isn't it? Eugene pressed his advantage. Gene pressed. Tell her about the time you lost $300 on a college basketball game, Stephen. Tell her about the loan shark who came to your apartment looking for payment. My chest tightened. There had been a loan shark, but not for gambling debts. I'd borrowed money to pay for Sarah's funeral expenses, and I'd been paying it back slowly. But Eugene was twisting the truth, making it sound like something it wasn't. Eugene, I said, standing up slowly, you're going to stop talking now. Or what? You'll hit me? Show Bella what kind of man her father really is? That's when I realized what he was doing. He was trying to create doubt, to make Bella question everything she'd learned about his crimes by painting me as a hypocrite. It was a desperate move, but potentially effective. Dad, Bella said quietly, is any of this true? I looked at my daughter, my brilliant, successful daughter who had trusted her husband to care for her father, and I made a decision. Some of it, I said. I do play poker on Friday nights, small stakes, with friends. And yes, I occasionally bet on sports. But Eugene is lying about the amounts and the impact on my finances. Eugene's smile widened, thinking he'd won. But you know what the difference is, Eugene, I continued. I never stole from my family to cover my losses. I never forged signatures or created fake companies. I never left my daughter's father choosing between medication and food while I lived in luxury. Bella's expression cleared, and I saw the doubt leave her eyes. Dad, I don't care if you play poker. I care that Eugene stole from you and lied to both of us for months. Eugene's face fell as he realized his desperate gambit had failed. You're both going to regret this, he said, standing up abruptly. I'm not going down alone. Yes, Bella said calmly. You are. As Eugene stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the front door behind him, I realized something important. His mask had finally slipped completely. We'd seen him at his worst, desperate and cruel, and willing to destroy anyone to save himself. But we'd also seen that he had nothing left. No leverage, no charm, no power over us. The real question now was, what would a desperate man with nothing left to lose do next? 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunrise paint the downtown skyline in shades of gold and pink. The apartment was everything Eugene had lied about giving me. Spacious, modern, with a view that took my breath away every morning. But more importantly, it was mine, paid for, with money that belonged to me. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Eugene's web of lies unraveled quickly once prosecutors got involved. The forged signatures, the shell companies, the systematic theft. It all painted a picture of a man who'd planned his crimes carefully and executed them without remorse. His friend Mike, the notary who'd helped facilitate the property fraud, had turned state's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. Other victims had come forward too. Elderly clients from Eugene's insurance business who'd suffered similar schemes. What we thought was personal betrayal turned out to be part of a larger pattern. Eugene was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, and identity theft. He'd tried to negotiate a plea deal at the last minute, offering to reveal where he'd hidden additional assets in exchange for reduced time. But there were no hidden assets. He'd lost everything to gambling and poor investments, just as we'd suspected. The restitution hadn't been complete. You can't get blood from a stone, as Bella's lawyer put it, but we'd recovered more than I'd dared hope. The lake house sale was reversed when the court ruled the transaction fraudulent. The insurance company that employed Eugene had a bonding policy that covered some of the theft. And surprisingly, Mike the notary had kept meticulous records that helped prosecutors trace money to accounts we didn't know existed. I got back about 60% of what Eugene had stolen. Not everything, but enough to live with dignity. The apartment had been Bella's idea, but I was the one who chose it. 2 bedrooms, so she and her future family could visit comfortably. A small study where I could read and work on the model trains I'd rediscovered. A kitchen where I actually enjoyed cooking again, now that I could afford real ingredients. Most importantly, it was close enough to Bella's new place that we could see each other regularly, but far enough away that I maintained my independence. Dad? Bella's voice called from the living room. Coffee's ready. I smiled and headed inside. These Sunday morning coffee visits had become our tradition, replacing the stilted holiday dinners of the Eugene years. We talked about everything now. Work, friends, memories of her mother, plans for the future. The barriers that Eugene had built between us, deliberately or not, were gone. "How are you feeling about the interview tomorrow?" Bella asked, handing me a steaming mug. I'd applied for a part-time position at a local community college, teaching basic financial literacy to adult learners. It wasn't about the money, though the income would be nice, but about purpose. My experience with Eugene had taught me how easily people could be manipulated when they didn't understand their rights and options. "Nervous," I admitted. "It's been a long time since I sat in a job interview." "You'll be perfect for it. Who better to teach people about protecting themselves from financial predators than someone who survived one?" She was right, though it had taken me months to see my experience that way. For a long time, I'd felt nothing but shame about being Eugene's victim. How could I, a man who'd worked his whole life and raised a daughter, be so easily fooled? But therapy, another expense I could finally afford, had helped me understand that sophisticated manipulation wasn't a reflection of my intelligence or worth. Eugene had spent years building trust and positioning himself as helpful before he struck. He'd used my love for Bella and my desire not to burden her against me. "Have you heard anything from his lawyer?" I asked. Bella shook her head. "The appeals are going nowhere. His conviction was solid. Too much evidence, too many witnesses, and frankly, I think he's given up. His brother told me Eugene doesn't even want visitors anymore." I felt a complex mix of emotions about Eugene's situation. Anger for what he'd done, satisfaction that he was facing consequences, but also something that might have been pity. He'd destroyed his marriage, his freedom, and his future for gambling debts and get-rich-quick schemes that never paid off. "Do you miss him?" I asked gently. "The man you thought he was?" Bella considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I think the man I fell in love with was mostly an act. The real Eugene was the one who could steal from his wife's father and sleep soundly at night. She'd filed for divorce the day after Eugene's arrest. The proceedings had been surprisingly simple since Eugene had no assets left to fight over and was facing prison time. Bella had kept the house, the one thing Eugene hadn't managed to gamble away, and had used it as collateral to help recover some of my stolen money. "I have some news," she said, settling into the chair across from me with a smile that reminded me of her mother. "Good news, I hope." "I think so. Remember David Chen, the accountant I met at that financial fraud seminar last month?" I nodded. Bella had started attending workshops on elder financial abuse, partly to understand what had happened to us, and partly to network with other professionals who dealt with these crimes. He asked me out to dinner, and I said yes. Her cheeks turned slightly pink. "It's been over a year since the divorce was final. I think I'm ready to try again." I felt a surge of protective instinct. What father wouldn't? But also genuine happiness for her. "What's he like?" "Kind, honest. He volunteers at a senior center teaching people about financial planning." "And Dad?" She leaned forward with a mischievous grin. "He insists that people should always manage their own accounts, never sign over power of attorney unless absolutely necessary." "Smart man. I already like him." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our coffee and watching the city wake up outside my windows. The view never got old. People heading to work, children playing in the park across the street, life moving forward in all its messy, beautiful complexity. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you forgive me?" The question caught me off guard. Forgive you for what? For being so blind to what Eugene was doing, for not visiting more, not checking on you directly, for trusting him when I should have trusted my instincts. I set down my coffee cup and reached across the small table to take her hand. "Bella, you have nothing to be forgiven for. You loved your husband and trusted him to do what you asked. You sent money every month to take care of me. The only person responsible for Eugene's crimes is Eugene." Tears glistened in her eyes. "But you suffered because I wasn't paying attention. I suffered because a criminal decided to steal from us. But you know what? In the end, it brought us closer together. We talk more now than we have in years. We understand each other better. Eugene thought he was dividing us, but he actually did the opposite." Bella squeezed my hand. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart." Later that afternoon, after Bella had left for her Sunday yoga class, I sat in my study working on a model train layout. It was a hobby I'd abandoned after Sarah died. But living in a place with enough space and enough money for small luxuries had reignited my interest. As I carefully painted tiny details on a miniature depot, I thought about the past year and how much had changed. 12 months ago, I'd been a broken man choosing between food and medication, isolated from my daughter and facing potential homelessness. Today, I was financially secure, emotionally healthy, and closer to Bella than I'd been in years. Eugene's crimes had devastated us temporarily, but his exposure had ultimately liberated us from years of lies and manipulation. He'd tried to steal my dignity along with my money, but dignity, it turned out, wasn't something that could be taken by force. It had to be given away, and I'd never given it away. Even at my lowest point, even when I was rationing pills and eating peanut butter sandwiches, I'd maintained my sense of self-worth. I'd known I deserved better, even when I couldn't figure out how to get it. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. Mr. Morrison? This is Detective Rodriguez. I wanted to update you on the Eugene Hartwell case. Has something happened? Actually, yes. We've recovered an additional $30,000 that Hartwell had hidden in an account under his mother's name. The funds will be returned to you after the paperwork is processed. I sat back in my chair, stunned. $30,000? Apparently, his mother wasn't aware of the account's existence. When she learned about it during our investigation, she immediately turned it over to authorities. Even Eugene's own mother had more integrity than he did. After hanging up, I called Bella to share the news. She was as shocked as I was, but also deeply satisfied that more of Eugene's hidden assets had been uncovered. Dad, she said, what will you do with the money? I looked around my comfortable apartment, at the model trains and the view in the well-stocked kitchen. I thought about the job interview tomorrow and the financial security I'd regained. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to set up a scholarship fund for older adults who want to go back to school but can't afford it. People who are starting over, like I did. That's perfect. And maybe a small emergency fund for people facing the kind of situation I was in. Nothing huge, just enough to help someone choose between medication and food. Doesn't have to be a choice at all. Dad, that's beautiful. Mom would have loved that idea. Sarah would have loved it. She'd always believed in helping people when you could, in turning your own struggles into something that could benefit others. As I hung up the phone, I realized something important. Eugene had tried to steal my future, but he'd actually given me something valuable. Perspective. I knew now what mattered and what didn't. I knew the difference between dignity and pride, between independence and isolation. Most importantly, I knew that family bonds, real ones, built on love and respect rather than obligation and guilt, could survive almost anything. Eugene was sitting in a federal prison cell, having lost everything that mattered: his wife, his freedom, his reputation, his future. And I was sitting in my beautiful apartment, closer to my daughter than ever, with enough money to live comfortably and enough purpose to keep moving forward. In the end, Eugene's plan to steal from me had backfired spectacularly. He'd tried to take my dignity and security, but instead had given me something I'd thought I'd lost forever: hope. The sunrise tomorrow would be just as beautiful as today's, and I'd be here to see it. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.